Good day to each and everyone. So now we're going to dive into another topic, which is the assessment development cycle. So before we're going to discuss this, we're going to identify our learning objectives. So first, let us explain the assessment development cycle and how each phases contributes to overall test quality. Second, demonstrate the cause and effect relationship between each phase of assessment development cycle and some quality of characteristic in high quality assessment. Last one is to identify scenarios that shows the effect of irrelevant assessments on phases of the assessment development cycle. And now, class, have you encountered having a test that is not connected to the learning outcomes of the content or your lesson? Throughout this discussion, we can answer these questions. And now, let us define what is assessment development cycle. So, ang tatandaan lang natin dito guys is yung CAPE characteristic, which is creating, refining assessment, moving from identifying learning outcomes, and making improvements of our assessments. So, this assessment development cycles has three phases, which are the planning phase, item construct phase, and the review and revise phase. And these phases has also a steps that contains. And as you can see on the picture, that is the parts of the phases, the steps, the bullets there are the steps on every phases how we're going to do an assessment. So my explanation now is just focuses on the planning phase, which contains three bullets or three steps, which are identify the purpose of the test, specifying learning outcomes to be assessed, and also the last one is prepare test specification. So now let us define first what is planning phase. In planning phase, we have to know the purpose of the test is identified and learning outcomes to be assessed are clearly specified, and also the table of specification is prepared to guide the items that we're going to be constructed or the assessment that we're going to do. So first, in planning phase, we should identify the purpose of our test. This aims to gather valid and reliable information. So in this phase or in these steps of first phase, what are we trying to measure and assessment? Is your assessment formative or summative? We should know what is the purpose of our assessment. It will just gather valid and reliable information and feedback to adjust the assessment that we do, in which pertains what student can do and will able to do, or what is the content of our topics. So for example, diagnostic multiple choice. So yung gagawin mo na assessment, or yes, yung assessment na purpose na yung assessment is multiple choice lang, in which detecting the source of difficulty in terms of misconceptions and areas of confusion. So gagamitin mo lang yung assessment na yun para ma-detect yung sources of difficult ng students para ma-adjust mo yung teaching strategy na yung gagawin. Nakadepende ito sa purpose ng yung assessment. In these steps, we should also need to connect it to the learning outcomes. It depends. It could be knowledge-based or performance-based. It depends on the content or the concept of the content that you are being explaining or discussing. The next one is specifying learning outcomes to be assessed. In these steps, we should remember the learning outcomes when properly stated. So dito sa learning outcomes, we need to define behavioral tasks to be performed. We need to specify kung ano ba yung learning outcomes sa content natin, and it will be dapat aligned doon sa assessment na ating gagawin. We need to specify what should be measured in the assessment, what learners should know and able to do along the establishment of that assessment. The learning outcomes need to be specific in content and nature of the task to be performed, attaining the content standard in terms of content and performance. These learning outcomes can vary from lower level to higher level. It depends on the grade of the students that you're going to have in assessment. The teacher should know also how to determine appropriate learning outcomes to be assessed and how they will going to be assessed, kasi it will affect to the students' performance on the assessment that you're going to have if it is not aligned, kasi mahihirapan sila mag-adjust kung like for example yung content, yung learning outcomes mo is performance based, tapos yung assessment na yung gagawin is oral recitation. So hindi nila alam kung ano yung gagawin nila kasi performance based yung ginawa mo doon sa class na yung tinuro, tapos ang gagawin mo doon sa assessment is which is oral recitation. So in this having a assessment, we should really need to align the learning outcomes to our assessment that we're going to have. So after specifying the learning outcomes to be assessed, we should go to the next steps, which is the prepare test specification. Here we should plan including its format, content, and types of skills or knowledge to be tested. So in order for us to be able to know of if the test items that we're gonna do assessment are reliable to the learning outcomes and items of content and performance. So sa pag-prepare ng test of specification, we should align the assessment that we're going to have in the learning outcomes so that mas reliable yung scores. In terms of reliable, mas reliable yung test scores ng results ng ating mga students, and may validity, and also we develop the fairness. So in the preparing the test specification, Macmillan says that some rules of thumb in determining how many items are sufficient for good sampling. So here is the some steps of preparing test specification in which the group 4 or the teachers and the group 4 was been discussed to us so that we can able to plan or format or the content of types of assessment that we're going to have. So it is this type of specification was very important in having or preparing a test or going to have an assessment, so that dito natin malalaman talaga, or dito natin dapat talaga i-align yung assessment na gagawin natin in terms of performance based ba yan or knowledge based ba yan na assessment na ating gagawin. Dapat talaga align siya doon sa learning outcomes of the content that you have been doing, also the purpose of the assessment that you're going to have. So now let us continue discussing the causes and effect of misalignment in the assessment of development cycle under the first phase, which is the planning phase. So this is the possible causes, the vague or unclear purpose of the test. The effect of this can be assessment doesn't measure what it should be. So as I have said earlier, dapat yung purpose ng assessment natin na gagawin, it should be clear so that it could be measured kung ano ba dapat yung i-measure. Yung validity natin is ma-align doon sa assessment natin gagawin. So next is misalignment learning outcomes. So the effect of this is misinterpretation of result. So yung mga result natin is kung misaligned ba yung learning outcomes, kung yung misaligned ba yung learning outcomes doon sa content na assessment natin ginawa. So yung sa misinterpretation tayo sa results nito, or hindi reliable yung yung scores ng ating assessment na gagawin. So that is the some causes and effect of misalignment of the first phase, which is the planning phase. So now let's try to connect the topic that we're going to discuss in validity, reliability, and fairness. So in first, in validity, we need to ensure that our assessment that we're going to measure are connected to the learning outcomes, so that the content of the content of assessment that we're going to have is valid. So in reliability naman, we should ensure the assessment produce consistent result across the assessment. So kung sa reliability naman, we should ensure that assessment that we're going to have is aligned mismo sa ating learning outcomes, and alam natin kung ano ba ang TOS natin gagamitin, and also the assessment that going to have, so that may reliability yung scores na result ng scores na ating mga students. And also the fairness, ensure the assessment is free from bias. Dapat we should also have the outcomes, or we should have that another activities from other students, especially yung may mga basic needs, so that we can address some issues of our students and we can have the fairness. So that's end to our discussion. Shukran for listening, guys, and for further explanation about the next phases, it will be discussed to you by my um, teacher colleagues, which is Mr. Camille Ardivilla or Sir Camille Ardivilla. So I will going to post here a activity and assignment about about our discussion, so it will be passed it on Friday, and just prepare for some question that I will be doing. Thank you, guys. And lastly, good day to each and everyone, and have a nice day.